Say recording, Larry?
Yes.
All right, you're on the ball. Okay, as we were talking about extranet, intranet, internet, make sure you keep track, especially on the tests, of the difference in spelling between internet, which is a generic, anything that's out on the World Wide Web, and intranet, which would be a resource that's available to both the outside and your internal employees. Okay? The book defines intranet as something that's only available to your internal employees. And that's a possibility that would also require, basically it's a website that would require some sort of authentication or login or security. The real answer, and the test that I create for this, the real answer is an intranet site, I-N-T-R-A. An intranet site is nothing more than a website on the inside of your network, or a web server on the inside of your network. Would you close that door, please? Okay? That intranet site could be part of an extranet, but it doesn't have to be. Christopher, what do I mean by that? What would the definition of the extranet site be? Which is what we just talked about a little bit ago.
Like in your network?
Huh?
Is it like links in your network? That's what you just said.
It's, I think you're right. I think I understood what you said. But Austin, clarify.
Is an extranet site sort of like you've got like another, it's almost like a roundabout. It's where it's not a part of the public view, and it's not your guys's, like your
Look how it's physically, yes. The answer is yes, but I'm going to state it differently. Look at the drawing up there. If you look at the drawing, in its purest form, watch the little, oh, you don't have that, do you? Watch the pointer. In its purest form, this server, which is written as an intranet server, does not have to have this arrow. Okay? Does not have to have this arrow, because it's available to your internal users, but it is a web server. This server, actually, and in this configuration with the arrow where you can get to it from the outside, it is part of an extranet site. There's security coming from the outside because it's going through the firewall. The firewall has an interface going to that web server, so there is security that's necessary. These users may or may not have to authenticate to get access to this. In most cases, at least in the configurations of companies that I've worked with, these users who are behind the network, why would they not have to authenticate to get access to that web server? Zach?
Because they're already there?
You're already authenticated. When you logged into the network with your domain account, you're already authenticated. You've already proven you are who you say you are. So once you've done that, oops, I'm sorry. I was thinking that this was the internal network. Let's put all this backwards. These are the users that have automatic access to this intranet site. Without this arrow here, this web server would have to be down here, right? But because it's got the arrow, it's going through the firewall, these users would have to authenticate, and these users on the internet would have to authenticate. The other way of doing this is, this web server is down here. There's still a connection, but then these have a direct connection to that web server also. And I know that I just confused you. The bottom line is, think about a web server that's on the inside of your network. That's considered an intranet web server, or an intranet site. That would have employee handbooks, it would have price lists that people are working on, that would have sales numbers, blah, blah, blah. Okay, if I open that up to the internet, then the firewall, given the right port, would allow access to that server. Internal users would automatically have access because they've authenticated in the network. External users would then have access to it with the right port and the right authentication. When I say authentication, what do I mean by that, Brittany? They have to log in some capacity. Now there are several different forms of authentication. Give me some examples of authentication. Brittany gave me just one right there. Hold on, Christopher. She gave me one example. What was that of authentication?
I didn't hear what
Did anybody hear what Brittany said? Larry,
She said login.
login. That's one form of authentication. You log in, a database server someplace checks it, make sure you have the right username and password. If it is, then you have access to it. That's one form of authentication. What's another form of authentication? Jessica, you should know this. That would still be a login. There's another way of authenticating. Proving you are who you say you are. Aaron. And we haven't gone over this, but maybe you know it.
Security
That'd be like a login. Anyone know? Another way of doing, do you know? Austin, how? Another way of doing this would be through a certificate. Okay, so it works like this. Let's pretend that this is just a file that is securely on one of these computers. We magically insert this file on this computer. When this computer tries to access, this intranet server, the intranet server says, first of all, do you have the right port? If so, yes. Okay, cool, that's good. But then you still need to authenticate. And if you still need to authenticate, that means you need to provide this certificate and prove that you are who you say you are. Even if this computer accesses the right port and gains access to it, but they don't have the certificate, then they're no good. Okay, so when that packet header is a component of this certificate that proves that they own this certificate, or they have this certificate. By the way, certificate services are a big part of Windows Server 2008, 2012, so we'll go into more detail about how to set that up. And that way, this user doesn't have to constantly log in every time they want to access a secure resource here or a secure resource behind the network. It's a certificate that's installed on it. These certificates become, they expire so that you can make sure that they've got the latest certificate and they're current and they're not cheating. So then they will issue a new certificate and this guy will get it. And they'll have to present that certificate. Get the idea. Oops. Okay, VPN, we've talked about this a ton of times. Virtual private network. The example that Brittany gave, which gave her 7 points on the test question, was there are 2 ways to be able to get to the resource that was the intranet site or any other resource behind the network that you allow us. The first way is through an extranet authentication. The second way is you build a tunnel. Okay? You build a tunnel between you and only you and the destination network, which is behind that firewall. When you build that tunnel, your entire path from the start, when that packet is originally created, until the packet gets all the way to the destination resource, that entire path and every packet that's associated with it, something happens. What happens to those packets? This is the essence of what a VPN is. Raise your hand. Frank, what is it? Come on, Frank. What happens to packets when we put them in a VPN? They become private, but there's a word for that. What makes them private? You're a hacker. What keeps you from intercepting that packet and tearing it apart and looking at the data? No. Michael. It's encrypted. Frank can't get access to that packet even if he intercepts it on the inside of Brittany's network because it is encrypted. First of all, it's got a tunnel that it goes through so other people can't even see it. And then the second thing is, if someone can see it or get to that through that tunnel, once he gets to the packet has super duper security on it, and Frank can't figure it out. It just looks like a packet that he can't access. The alternative to that is everything else on the internet is wide friggin' open. Is wide open. How many of you watched have watched the TV show Person of Interest? Okay? Everything you put out on the internet is accessible to anyone very easily, much more easily than was ever expected in the beginning. Okay? So similar to person of interest, there are people watching what you put out on the internet. They're certainly watching the websites you go to. They're certainly watching the emails that you send back and forth. Encryption hides that, because you don't want Frank getting access to your social security number that you're putting in on a loan application site. Okay? You don't want Frank getting access to the username and password that you put into log into your corporate website. Because if you do, Frank's going to take that information, he's going to sell it to Larry. And Larry, who is from North Korea, is going to take that information and start charging against your credit card. So, the moral of the story, boys and girls, is everything you put out on the internet is susceptible to someone gaining access to it. You can minimize the risk by encrypting that data using technologies like virtual private networks. But it's still not complete. All right? Questions about what we've talked about so far today? Got it? Okay. Tuesday, we will have a quiz. Tuesday, we'll have a quiz. Those of you who have to make up the test, will make it up on Tuesday, plus take the quiz. Okay? Christopher, check at the end of school today for that lecture. It'll be out there. All right, shut the video off. Still got 3 minutes.